you hear me well? Okay, great. Thanks. So I'm going to do a short introduction also, so for those audience members who haven't joined us yesterday, and to sort of just think through the relationships that develop between the presentations of our day one of Experimenter Curators Hub 2018. The house rules, just to sort of repeat, are to please switch off your phones or put them on silent. Please don't cross these lines in the middle of the room, etc., across the presentation, in the middle of presentations. And also, is there anything else, actually? That's it. Okay, that's all. Questions at the end. Presenters are going to present for around 30 minutes, and then we're going to enter into dialogue. So in Jubesh's presentation, he reminded us of Deleuze's key text, Postscript on the Societies of Control. And I was thinking of this one passage, which is, there is no need to ask which is the toughest or most tolerable regime, for it's within each of them that liberating and enslaving forces confront one another. When we address archival production, we are made to confront dynamic currents of history-telling and historical becoming. It was through, let us say, plowing the archive of culture practitioners from Sabi's presentation that a plurality in thinking and materiality beyond schemes of control, hegemonic memory, and even the grasp of monolingual form emerge. Sabi and Jubesh were also encouraging us to think through the suspicion of big data and the politics of fake data. How are we to continue to consider the organic character of curation with room for forgetting, rearrangements, detours, and from within the data paradigm, which defines an image of our collective existence. Citation and sourcing are indeed key to curatorial practice and further to spatializing thought. So we were exposed to different positions around these acts. Erin considered citation as accumulated experiential knowledge. Jubesh spoke of how an exhibition-making approach emerges by articulating certain source fields that perform as contact zones, as exploding spaces to think differently about the exhibition making and artistic work across different generations. They also think about inventing new forms each time, and this is included for the Shanghai Biennale, the theory opera, to read a sort of dissonance and incoherence within, contested though it may be, within Ritvik Ghatak's Jukti, Tapo Argapo, and also think about scientific history and responses to structures and apparatus such as Foucault's pendulum. The importance of hacking the archive and of its incomplete construction has also been foregrounded for us. How to reinvent through use. What does it mean for curators to use the archive of institutions that have been prior to their work, that have disappeared across regimes? How do we use these institutional sources and oral testimonies and memories of the artists who come from a certain generation, who have been teachers, for instance? This was something that Erin was talking about, coming from the field of human rights study, etc. What does it mean for her to come to Cambodia in the aftermath of the Civil War as well? What does it mean for artists of the current generation to reject the gaze of a tourist archive, of a colonial archive? And what are the new strategies of overturning the power regime of image production in that aftermath? Jubesh also encouraged us to think about the incoherence of practice, and in this case we also think about incoherence in relation to cities within today's presentation, as capacity and not only as a sort of formal provocation or as a strategy of exclusion. And he sort of mentioned rambling and stuttering as a state of encounter. Today we will also think about an important notion through the presentation of Bonaventure Ntikung, which is hospitality, and hospitality as the enmeshing of hostility and hospitality, becoming strange, of embracing strangeness, and of living in a time of estrangement. To think also of sonority and extradisciplinarity within exhibition making, and where sound becomes epistemology, and that's something that we're going to also look at in today's presentations. I just want to quote from an essay of Prasad Chetty and Rupali Gupte, who will present today at the end. Cities are formally complex, experientially intense, and have logics that are incoherent. They fold spaces, practices, and relationships together to create an enormous, perpetually transforming morph. And when you think about Calcutta and sort of that sort of beginning of their essay also becomes grounded in a completely different way. So with that, I'm actually going to come to the first presentation for this morning and read to you Adam Szymczyk's biography shortly, but some of y'all may also be familiar because he's participating for the second time. In the meantime, Documenta 14 has taken place, so it's a sort of before after, and so we're very, very glad to be having this discussion with you. Adam Szymczyk is artistic director of Documenta 14. He was co-founder of the Foxhall Gallery Foundation in Warsaw, and worked there also as curator between 1997 till 2003, which was when he took up the post of director at Kunsthalle Basel in Switzerland. There he realized several exhibitions, a lot of which were solo exhibitions, and this is also something that Adam sort of maintains as his focus on certain artistic trajectories has been ongoing for very, very long, and certain of those artists were introduced within Documenta 14, but there was also practices that, so those include sort of artists such as Michel Audet, for instance, Moira Devi, who are artists who he has worked with, Naeem Mohammed, which was his last exhibition at Kunsthalle Basel, but also what it meant for us as a sort of huge team to work together, not as agents, but really as colleagues from the very start of Documenta 14, and also expand the field of our thinking and our engagement with artists, in which we were introducing artists to one another, and that was a very important part of our process. Adam also co-curated with Elena Filipovic the 5th Berlin Biennale for Contemporary Art, and he's been the recipient of the Walter Hopps Award for Curatorial Achievement at the Menil Foundation, Houston, and we'll let Adam start with that. Thank you.
I'm not an early bird, so it's gonna take me a while to get the ball rolling, I suppose. So maybe I would just, can you hear me first of all? Yeah, the last exhibition at the Kunsthalle Basel was actually, I think not Naeem's, but there was one exhibition in 2014 in the fall, which was a kind of closing moment, and that was the Argentinian artist David Lamelas, which was a very, very special moment because the exhibition was basically a reenactment of David Lamelas' piece called Time as Activity, where people arranged in a sort of diagonal across a vast gallery on the upper floor of the Kunsthalle would basically pass the time to each other by basically telling one person to the other standing in this diagonal across the room the time of the moment, and this time would of course pass, so at a certain point there would be a 1 minute later. So there's a kind of moment of very fragile transmission between random members of the audience who participate in the work and who step in and step out of this line of people passing the time to each other. So the time is being sustained by a presence of what nominally and normally should pass should be considered an audience. An audience is in most cases it's a passive anonymous body in which individuals have basically no role to play, and this is something that is particularly striking in mega exhibitions, as they would call, or as some would call, the documenta. In mega exhibitions, the main issue with the audience is to reach a certain number of visitors, and very soon the press is beginning to, the media and all people around, politicians and so forth, they begin to speculate whether the number of visitors of the previous edition is going to be exceeded, because very much like in these diagrams shown yesterday, there is a constant growth among, throughout the 13 editions of Documenta, from the first edition, 1955, which was visited by a pretty fair number of 100,000 people, up to the Documenta 13, which had, I believe, around, 800,000 or so. So there was always this push for 1 million. We are going for 1 million visitors, and this was something that our entire team tried to a little bit, if not reject, then to just pare down this expectation of kind of exhibition producing masses of visitors. This kind of production of audience through an exhibition, and the audience considered as numbers, is something that is very detrimental to any attempt at singular individual understanding of what an exhibition or parts of exhibition could be and mean. With Documenta, or with exhibition of the magnitude of Documenta, it's becoming even more difficult, and especially with Documenta 14, because as you probably all know, Documenta 14 was 2 exhibitions, or we would call it 2 acts of 1 exhibition. One took place in Athens and opened in April 2017, and the second one, which should have been normally the Documenta proper in Kassel, opened in Kassel as a second act in June 2017, with a period of around 6 weeks overlap. And I'm just repeating this a little bit because I think when I spoke here in Kolkata for the first time, all of that was just an assumption, So in the very beginning, there were very lofty ideas and assumptions about what this exhibition could possibly be, and I'm afraid that the result actually not only was able to stand to, but also kind of surpassed these expectations. And I'm not talking about the size of exhibition. For me, it's still an exhibition that had moments of actually plenty of areas or kind of focal points or focal areas, while it was definitely vast, by which I do not mean that it was kind of oversized, So sometimes the area that is covered by a cultural undertaking, and there I don't only mean the space, meaning Athens, Kassel, and all exhibition venues over 13, Athens and similar number in Kassel, but also one has to add to it other fields that were, so to say, affected or engaged with in the exhibition, and this is, for instance, television. So regular programming on the Greek national channel called ERT, and this is the channel that some years before Documenta opened in Athens was closed due to economic reasons. So the national television did not exist for a period of time. The TV viewers would turn on their TV and they would see a black screen, which must have been a shocking experience if you expect the news, for instance. So During the time when we were working on Documenta, this television was again already operating, and we decided to approach the ERT and propose around 50 evenings, Mondays actually, where we would program, I think, around 2 hours usually, and this would be on air, on television, and seen not only in Athens, but also in many other places in Greece, everywhere where the television reaches. So one could say that the programming of Documenta in this way also reached the very tiny villages in Greece. And if you had a sleepless night, because it was quite late, like at 11 o'clock, I think, in the evening, you would be able to see a film by, say, Jonas Mekas on state television, which is quite untypical. And I think it's a very good way for let's say, an audience or recipients to experience something of an exhibition without bothering with getting on a car or bus or train and going to Athens or traveling to Kassel, which is even more expensive and more complicated. Then there were radio stations as part of the project called Every Time I Hear the Sound, which was organized by Bonaventure, who's going to be later, I think, speaking today via Skype or so. This was a radio which extended to several different countries around the world, where we worked with existing radio stations, so it was not created from the scratch each time, but there were particular stations identified in advance and asked to either host parts of our programming or to prepare special programs of kind of sonic nature, by necessity, of course. It was and this together, plus the radio specially created in Berlin called Sevi Radio, with a number of projects commissioned especially from the sound artists, added to kind of not only the spatial outreach, but also to the kind of temporal dimension of the exhibition. So the exhibition was kind of dispersed. It was everywhere and it was at different times, different locations. So I'm talking about it in order to say that the exhibition is not only that which is kind of contained within a gallery or museum or a kind of post-industrial space that is repurposed to become a temporary exhibition venue, and all these kind of maneuvers that we know all too well, which serve to expand the kind of domain or empire of exhibitions onto more and more spaces. Our ambition was to organize an exhibition that will be very strongly present beyond particularly confined spaces, and I think this is also possible through giving particular attention to publications, and this is why we began quite early on with the magazine called South as a State of Mind, of which we were hoping to have 4 issues published in the duration of Documenta, and we accomplished that. So these magazines are each around like 250 pages of mostly newly commissioned writing and artistic projects, and especially commissioned for the magazine, and poetry and fiction and documents and so forth. So the production of the magazine was in fact a process parallel to the exhibition. The magazine was co-edited by Quinn Latimer and myself, with contributions of all those who were participating in the curatorial team, which is I think more than, I don't know, it's around 15 people who are in the end part of curatorial team of Documenta, and many others who were accompanying the magazine. And so the 4th issue was produced was released shortly after Documenta closed in Kassel on the 17th of September 2017. But what makes me particularly happy is that right now we have another issue of South as a State of Mind produced. So this magazine existed before Documenta under the same name, founded by a Greek curator, Marina Fokidis. And Marina is continuing with the magazine and with various guest editors who are going to be working on the subsequent issues. So an example of the South as a State of Mind is useful when we think about how Documenta try to engage with existing institutions in Athens. And by institutions, I don't only mean particular organizational entities such as museums or galleries or similar, or foundations, but a magazine is also an institution, and also kind of extra institutional entities like grassroots organizations. So we, in fact, try to use Documenta in order to sustain the work of institutions in Athens that were very often in precarious situations. So we didn't want to add too much to the existing landscape. We did not want to create new short-lived phenomena on the map of Athens, but we wanted rather to put a certain stress or to give presence, visibility, and some kind of material recognition, let's say, also by opening these institutions to a large, relatively large audience, also international audience, and hundreds of participants in the project who came to Athens during the time of Documenta, and also already in the time preceding the opening, because activities in Athens did not start in 2017. It all started in September 2016 with the opening sessions of what we call Parliament of Bodies, which was sort of in place of what normally goes as public programs of the exhibition. So Parliament of Bodies started its sessions in September 2016 in the building of former military barracks that then were the site of the secret police in Greece during the time of military junta between 1967 and 1974. So this is a historically charged place which was converted into a municipal gallery in the 1980s, and for that purpose sort of fake white walls were constructed around the space. So we did, together with an architect and artist, Andreas Angelidakis, a complete redesign of this space, or rather I would say de-design, meaning that the walls were pierced, and we opened the walls onto the windows that existed there in this building before, and we also did a sort of almost like archaeological probing of the ceilings, showing the whole infrastructure behind the suspended ceiling and so forth. So we kind of ripped the building open a little bit from the inside. Well, here, this is Castle. Maybe you can find, yes, this is 34 Exercises of Freedom, the opening sessions of the Parliament of Bodies. If you click more, perhaps, or any video, yeah, it will kind of show the setting. Maybe the one on the left.
This one?
Antonio Negri. Yeah. So there's kind of special setting inside of the Parco Eleftheria building, which Parco Eleftheria means the Park of Freedom, ironically. Bearing in mind that it was the site of the secret police during the junta period in Greece. So
I just want to give the floor to the rest of the participants today.
Yes, I won't let Paul speak for too long.
Go to the
Parliament of Bodies organized by
today,
philosopher, writer, transgender activist Paul Preciado, and this is one of the opening sessions with Antonio Negri. So as you see, people are the people who are participating in the session of the Parliament are seated on these blocks that are made of very light material that however looks like blocks of concrete, because it's covered with a kind of fabric on which the picture of concrete is printed. So it's at the same time an image and an object. So it's an image that can be reconfigured and rearranged and kind of built into several different functional configurations. So it could be either a scatter of concrete or concrete blocks, or it could be a sort of more like an amphitheater or any other form that fitted a given, let's say, program. And these programs were different and many. So from more conventional, say, lecture or presentation formats to performances to music events to film presentations and many other types of activity. And each night there will be a different architecture of the space organized. Okay, I think we can turn it off. Right now. So, but the important thing about the Parliament of Bodies is that it preceded the opening of exhibitions by good 7 or 8 months even. So Documenta in Athens slowly gained presence, or it became a kind of part of the daily rituals of those who were interested in engaging with exhibition and its different projects. And then in the following year, in 2017, I think in April, we began what we called Continuum, which was a series of visits by different artists who were invited to make new works for Documenta. And I think over 100 artists visited us as of April 2017. And they were hosted in the building, which is part of the historical campus of the Athens National Technical University, or the Polytechnio. And this is the building where the student uprising against junta took place in 1973, which was when the police and the military entered the area of the university. Also a tank entered the area, forcing through the gate, and some students and other protesters or activists were killed either in the area of Polytechnio or in the surrounding area. So it's a kind of memorial as well. It's a place of learning. It's also a place where the final part of the International Congress of Modern Architecture in 1935, which took place between Marseille and then moved over the Mediterranean on a steamship, and then ended up culminated in Athens with Le Corbusier and all these modern architects meeting a very young Greek modern architects who had a slightly different idea of modernism. And they had a conference in the Polytechnio, in the very place which then in 1973 will be a main kind of the epicenter of the student protest in Athens, will be occupied 1 year before the fall of the junta, which happened not exactly due to the uprising of the students, but it happened due to the failed invasion of the right wing, orchestrated by the right wing government of Greece onto Cyprus, which was then fended off by Turkey, and as a result, the junta in Greece fell. So, by locating this initial, let's say, movements of Documenta in these two historically charged places, the former detention and torture chambers of the military and secret police in the Park of Eleftheria, and the second place, the Polytechnio, where the student uprising was taking place, we kind of try to be, albeit for a very short period, or to live through some of the memories that we thought were very often repressed in the Greek society and not so familiar to the internationals, to the foreigners, so to say. Excuse me? Time? Yeah, okay, 10 minutes left. Okay, so that was the initial phase of Documenta in Athens, after which the exhibition began. And to explain, the subtitle of the project, Learning from Athens, was meant always as a kind of working title of the exhibition, and it remained a working title of the exhibition, although since we used it quite consequently, many thought that this is the final title of the show, but this is a matter of taste. For me, it was a working title in the sense that it was this gerund form, the learning, and not a particular result or a kind of material effects of the exhibition that matter most. The learning means that you're opening up to practically anything, any influence, and you become like a field, like a not a field, but like a locus of confluence rather than a kind of transmitter one way of certain traditions. So in the learning process, can we go back a second? We had these several categories here, and each of them has the word public very stubbornly hammered into the website users' heads. So as if it was enough to make an exhibition. Exhibitions seem to be by definition public. Are they? I'm not sure. We called it public exhibition. In this way, we wanted to make a nod or perhaps pay tribute to our public or to the public. It's very difficult to get use of certain habits, for instance, saying like our audience, whose audience, to whom does the audience belong, you know? We wanted to say that exhibition is just one of many things that are produced, you know, and this production is not a production by a particular curatorial team, which is then sort of offered, you know, on a plate to a particular audience, because there is something terribly patronizing about this idea of, you know, producing something and then giving it to someone, because it's your courtesy, you know. The question is, you know, whose courtesy this should be. Second, public programs quite obviously involving a number of participants who are invited or who, let's say, co-produced the initial 34 exercises of freedom and who then participated in creation of associations. And this is the slightly different setting of the Parliament of Bodies in Kassel, if you can scroll up again to this picture. Exactly, so this is in Kassel, and there, let's say the whole setting of the Parliament of Bodies was made of these blocks that were that had this print of camouflage pattern. This is a camouflage pattern of a particular type of tank, Leopard tank, which is a #1 tank produced by German military industries, and these industries are located in Kassel and selling these tanks and other military equipment to places like Greece or Qatar. And so we built one-to-one replica, like kind of slightly simplified replica of a tank out of these blocks. And this is again a project called Polemos, which means the conflict or the war, by the Greek artist and architect Andreas Angelidakis. And then before the first session of the parliament, together with artists and some people who were already coming to participate in the first session, we just dismantled this tank and we turned it into a kind of open seating area in the central spot of Museum Fridericianum, which is symbolically like the most important place of Documenta, because this is where Arnold Bode in 1955 in half in like bombed out building organized the first edition of Documenta, and this is where famously in the preceding edition of Documenta Karolin Krzysztof Bakardziew, the artistic director at that time, located the so-called brain, which was the part of exhibition that kind of condensed certain lines, storylines, topics, but also quite idiosyncratic quotations, or it kind of uncovered something of the. I read it as a sort of walk through a curator's brain, because exhibition as an inanimate, abstract construct doesn't have a brain, but a curator has a brain. So if part of exhibition is called a brain, it's probably the curator's brain. So we replaced this brain with a kind of collective and changing brain of Parliament of Bode, located the meeting place and the place of exchange of ideas and debate, and the kind of sometimes very fierce polemic right in the center of the exhibition. In this way, we did affirm the kind of centrality of the place. I admit it might have been better to locate it off-center, but the best ideas often come as a sort of esprit d'escalier the spirit of the one who descends the stairs, so they come too late. All right. I think I would maybe stop at this point and just ask Natasha to continue a little bit with, bringing it to those questions that you might have had or whatever you want to do, and then we would open to the questions from the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Adam. We had also discussed that it would be, you can't see me, but I have to sit here to just show you to kind of create some more threads that actually run through the artistic projects that reveal to you more on the methodology that was pursued across both cities. So as Adam was revealing to us, the artists were starting to visit the two cities a year before Documenta 14 opened in Athens, and the strategy was also to think with them of what it meant to respond in this way to these two kind of coexisting lines of traumatic reality and traumatic realism that actually run through Europe today, and the ways in which they would foreground their life work in this scenario. So it wasn't, so when I just wanted to mention that when we sort of work with somebody like an artist such as Akinbode Akinbi, he is a photographer who would actually walk through the streets of Athens over several weeks and find relationships between Athens and other cities in the world that he has lived and walked through. And so the idea was also not to enter into the reality of Athens through this sort of exterior eye, but to really think through what it meant for these artists to be in both cities for a significant amount of time. It also meant, when we deal with sort of an artist such as Rashid Areen, to think about his contributions in terms of third text, to think about his contributions, his early works, which we showed in Kassel, but in Athens it meant actually creating this space. I don't know, Adam, if you want to mention a little bit about this project.
I think Rashid Areen's projects, which are kind of both new projects, especially this is definitely something that I think he had not tried before. Shamiana, Food for Thought, and then the other project was basically a presentation on the kind of modular structure that we know from Rashid Areen's work since the late 60s of all existing issues of the Third Text magazine in Kassel, right? With let's say a number of new paintings of a kind that he's been doing over the last decade, I suppose. So bluntly, one could say, this was practice, and third text is the theory of that practice. So it was kind of like a very sly play on the idea of kind of division between the theory and practice, because this here was a kind of tent which had a kitchen in a center, and over a period of 100 days of Documenta, it served, I think, around 100 free meals, about 100 free meals to anyone, coming. So people would queue up, receive a ticket, and then they could have a free meal, and this was going on for 100 days non-stop. While, if you can go to the Kassel presentation, here for 100 days you could, those who came to that part of the exhibition in what we call the new gallery of Kassel, which is the old disused post office building in Kassel, or the logistical center of the German post. So the visitors could actually read from all these issues of third text, which were the issues from the entire period when Rashid Areen was first founding editor and then editor-in-chief of the magazine. Yeah, so this was just an example of in which way the tension between the project or projects realized by one artist in two different cities could be read if you were aware of both projects in both cities. Yeah, these are all historical artists in the exhibition. And we tried not to, not to count artists in the show. And I must also say that the full list of artists was not known to each of the members of the team until very late. So there was a lot of internal speculation as a principle. So we were not working with something like artist list. We eliminated that. We were working with specific clusters of artists who were in many cases brought by different participating curators or curatorial advisors, and we try to organize meanings within these clusters and then find connections and not to care so much about kind of alphabetic list. So this was done posteriorly only for the use of the website and for all kind of practical use, because we did not want to complicate the matter further for our visitors, but we just didn't want to create this condition of transparency and the kind of production of the exhibition according to an alphabetic list of 153 artists for the team working on Documenta. We wanted to kind of destabilize this moment of setting up of the exhibition.
You want to talk about?
Yeah, if I want to talk about this, yeah. If you go back one, maybe? No? No. This is Kassel or Athens? Is there a picture of the path itself? Okay, anyway. So, these are photographs and drawings by Dimitris Pikionis, and during this International Congress of Modern Architecture, Dimitris Pikionis was a young architect in Greece, and he was one of those who were speaking during the Congress next to the world-famous architects of international modernism. He was a proponent of what then became known as critical regionalism, which was kind of critical correction initiated, I believe, by those young Greek architects to the sort of universal sameness of international modernism that was kind of lacking the recognition of the local context. And so what Pikionis proposed was to take into account the local building traditions and also the climate, the condition of the site and the kind of historical conditions. So the context in its many dimensions, not only kind of material dimensions of the context, but also the kind of historical depth and maybe also to a degree a kind of political constraints of every context in which an edifice or work of architecture is built. So in the exhibition we showed a number of photographs from the time when in 54, between 1954 and 57, Pikionis was commissioned to kind of design a system of footpaths on the hills of Philopappou Hill, from which you see the Acropolis. It's the Hill of Muses, from which you see the Acropolis, and on the slopes of Acropolis as well. And he used the paths that were shepherds' paths for centuries. So he did not impose a design of his own. He did not landscape the landscape, you know. So this idea of landscaping as a kind of incursion was rejected, and a certain passivity of design was introduced instead. And I think this was something from which we learned a lot also in terms of how to situate works within the exhibition. You know, rather than imposing, try to go with. So Pikionis then built his path out of what we could call spolia, fragments. Fragments of both the rubble of buildings destroyed or demolished after the Second World War in Athens, but also some ancient pieces of broken clay pottery found here and there in Athens. So basically he created a huge horizontal sculptures on which to walk, you know, and this is kind of predating works of, say, minimal artists. Carl Andre once said that he's very near to the idea of a sculpture as a road. You know, sculpture as a road, not as an object, but as something to walk on. So Pikionis realized that in 54, 57, you know, good 10 years before minimal sculpture was supposedly invented in the US. If we don't agree on the fact that it was Rashid Arin who proposed this kind of modular system well before US minimalism. So somewhere on this path of Pikionis, there's also a small church built by this architect at the beginning of the path, and next to the church is this kind of open-air tea pavilion. And there we showed works by Vivian Suter, who is a Swiss artist living in Guatemala since early 1980s. And she sort of, you know, her studio is in the jungle, basically, on the slope of a hill in a small village in Guatemala. And this is a former coffee plantation, completely overgrown with kind of tropical plants. And she's painting partly in a kind of shack that she constructed as her studio, partly just outside. And in a similar way, she was painting in this place called Nisiros, which is a small island that is like just a cone of a volcano that is still fuming, but it's apparently not going to erupt anymore. So this is the scenery in which these paintings were created. So they were just painted on canvas, unstretched, laid on the ground, sort of in situ, in the crater of the volcano, you know, with kind of sulfuric fumes in the background and kind of surrounding the artist and maybe giving her a particular high during the process. And then we thought that to sort of imprison these paintings in a gallery would be a pity, and this marvelous location of the Pikionis pavilion that is on the one hand protected from, you know, by the sunroof, on the other hand completely open to the surrounding of the Filopapu Hills. So the paintings were there, and they were also, you know, gently moving as the wind was blowing. So there was a really kind of situated installation of paintings. And the second installation is in Kassel. So here the paintings were installed in. There was a number of a row of small pavilions adjoining a residential and office building, and they used to have commercial function, but since they were terribly overheating during summer, they were slowly abandoned, and right now they are standing empty, and the building is slated for demolition, and I suppose it should be demolished in the coming years. And so we used these pavilions for a number of works, and Vivian Suter arranged her and her mother's Elisabeth Wild work in that pavilion in Kassel. So you kind of, here you see a kind of scaled down version of a modernist building with all walls transparent, like in the Neue Nationalgalerie in Berlin, for instance, here reduced to the scale of a commercial pavilion. Okay, I think I'll stop here and we can open to questions from the audience.